Hi, everybody, and welcome to an academic, scholarly, esteemed edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. It is so academic that I've worn my Marvel t-shirt with all of the Avengers, well, not all of them, but several of them assembled there, and just delighted to be talking with Dr. Ashley Dallacqua.
That's
Dr. Dallacqua, thank you. May I call you Dr. Dallacqua?
You can. You can also call me Ashley, or
Okay.
my fifth graders used to call me Mama D. I answer to that too.
That is so funny
Yep.
because my students call me Dr. D a lot.
Yeah.
A couple of them call me Dr. JJ for some reason.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so I do have a good bit of fun with that. Yeah. Um, but yeah, okay. All right. Ashley or Mama D.
Mama D.
That might
Yep.
take a little getting used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
That one
little.
it's you got to feel your way into it. My students, that was what they felt good about because Dallacqua was really hard for them to pronounce.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I
Yep.
get like Dehart or DeHart, Dehart, and I really don't hear the difference. I'm usually so
Yeah.
much in my head that I don't even pay that much attention to what people say my name is. Um,
Yeah.
we say it Dehart, but then if someone calls from the office or if someone calls me DeHart somewhere and people know, they're like, "Oh no, it's actually I didn't even
Mm.
notice."
Didn't even catch it. Yep.
Yeah. So you and I have recently. This is our third podcast together,
Yes, it
actually.
is. It is. This
Um,
is number three.
yeah, yeah, because you and I met before the pandemic, which feels like 10 years ago, or an
Oh my
alternative
goodness.
dimension,
Yeah.
2019, and I signed up to be on your podcast,
Yep.
Reading in the Gutter, which I hear might be coming back in one way or
Yeah,
another.
I've been talking with Danny. So I think that we're gonna record some more episodes starting this summer, hopefully.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I'm talking with Danny tomorrow. I've accidentally misscheduled her twice now.
Oh no.
So I feel terrible. I'll send this to her as a videoed apology before we meet.
I
I
think
think it's
that's smart.
tomorrow, the day after. Yeah, it's the day after. I better not show
Mhm.
up tomorrow looking for her. So I was on that podcast, and then you and I were just on a podcast a
Yep.
couple of weeks ago or a month ago, something like that. And now here we
Yeah,
are again. We're
I
just
know. Talking
podcasting away
comics
all the
through the
time.
media.
And I discovered, so I'll actually go a little bit out of order here because I
Yeah.
also discovered that way back in 2012, does it feel like a game show where I'm like behind this door?
And it was just
Um,
like, what's he gonna say?
that's right, that's right. It's like that SNL thing. What's my name?
Yes, yes.
No, you wrote about film once upon a
Yeah,
time as well.
I
Yeah.
did. That was gosh, I remember writing that article. I was still in the classroom, and
Mm,
this was the second article I ever wrote. And it bounced off of I had done some research as a master student with these amazing fifth graders, and one of them kept calling the way he read comics as his mind movie. And so that was kind of my jumping off point in thinking about how young people were thinking about reading comics and those connections to film. And I remember writing it, and I thought it was just such a fun and I don't know if goofy is the right word. But to me, it felt like such an out there piece at the time that I didn't know if it
yeah.
would ever get published. I was just so delighted when it found a home.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Now, sometimes you write those things because there's like this call and you want to fit it somewhere, but it's really
Yeah,
nice when you sort of create something and then someone says, "Yes, we'll take that."
yeah, I just wrote it because it was fun, and then someone wanted to publish it. It was really nice.
Yeah, the reason I'm drawn to that is because, as you know, once upon a time I worked with this guy, Sturge Bitzakis,
Yeah, love Sturge.
famously difficult to get along with. No,
Oh my
I'm
goodness, he's
kidding.
such yeah,
Everybody loves Sturge. Everybody loves
he's so
Sturge,
great.
including me. He really is. Best chair ever. And so I was working with him and I was working on my dissertation and I thought, well, he does comics. What should I do? And in my brain, because as a young reader, I started reading comics and got really engaged with them, but that was also about the time that Tim Burton changed the comic landscape with
Hmm.
the, moody Batman movie. And so I think immediately in my head, sort of all of those things started to live together,
Mhm.
the whole transmedia thing that people talk about. And
Yeah.
so when I started going into doing the dissertation, I thought, well, I'm going to look at film. So
Yeah.
when I have that sort of mental movie connection in common.
Yeah, and I love thinking about something that I've kind of been having fun with lately with some of the teachers I'm working with is building multimodal sets and pulling
Mm-hmm.
in film and television and just ways at getting at topics from different media angles.
Yeah.
Um, just to like set students up to think about like what form gets chosen and to what purpose and how does it work on you as a viewer and a reader.
Yeah.
It just makes it fun to dig into and you know position students as, you know, to read and view as experts or as writers or as artists, directors, as critics with opinions about these things. And I think when they've got multiple forms, they can start to pick apart those differences and really think about like, well, I like this, I don't like this, this works for me, this is working on me in this way.
Yeah.
Just gonna be tons of fun in the classroom to build off of those spaces.
Yeah, and I'm noticing the end game poster over your shoulder, which
I
is kind of
know. So
like,
that's you're peeking into my husband's workspace
oh yes,
back
do you
there.
share
Although
the
I am also
affinity?
a fan
Oh, I was
of
gonna
the
say it.
Marvel films. But yeah, this is like our shared space, so you can see some. This is my Jeff Smith poster
Oh, love it, love it.
behind me. That one's well, we share it, but I claim it as mine.
Yeah, yeah. Your contribution to the room.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about the levels and layers of knowledge that students have to have, readers, viewers, or whatever
Yeah.
word you want to use, to dig into something like Endgame, or to dig into some of these universes. And I mean, I've seen the movies with my wife and been like, oh, they're putting that there because they're getting ready, like
Yeah.
feverishly
Yeah.
whispering in the theater to be like, this is supposed to be leading into this. So it's just that amazing story architecture.
Hmm.
And I think that comics don't get enough credit. I think that film doesn't get enough credit. Um, but also hat tip to teachers that use them actively and notice those things and tap in.
Yeah, well, and that use them as texts that are complex,
Mhm.
right? That like spend some time on the form. And so I think one of the reasons that these forms don't get enough credit or don't get to quote unquote count um, is, they're enjoyable to read, but also I think they feel good or feel easy to read and view.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and when you can pause and break down the work that your brain is doing to make meaning, like taking the time to do that with students is kind of giving credit to all the hard work they're doing to make sense of all of the choices that are being made. So one of my favorite things to do with teachers is to just break down a comics page with them and start
Yeah.
to realize all of the very intentional choices that are being made to work on them that just feel natural as they read them, but stopping to acknowledge, oh, this is making me feel this way, or this did
Mhm.
draw my eye over here. Like that was a choice that the artist made. And it's just like, oh, like there's a lot that goes into this. Like, uh-huh, there is,
Oh
isn't
yeah.
it so fun?
Oh yeah. Well, and as many comics creators have said before, and on this show and in other places, there's this incredible amount of time that goes into that, and this concept of mise en scène. Everything that
Mhm.
is in a panel on a comics page is there for a reason. Everything that's in that tracking shot from Goodfellas is
Yeah,
there for a reason,
yeah,
and you might not even be conscious of exactly the way it acts on you, but when you stop, you think critically. That's really what we're after as reading teachers and as teachers
yeah,
across content areas anyway. So
yeah,
why not seize on all of those tools? And I love your thinking about multimodal text sets to do that.
yeah. And they're just fun to dig into and to think about like just the layers. But also then when you're thinking about wanting to just to do service to your students who bring such a diversity of language and experience and culture into the space that when you've got multiple texts, multiple media for them to access these big ideas, it's giving more opportunities for students to sink their teeth into it and to make sense out of these big concepts that we want to dig into together.
Have you seen the model? I think it's Sarah Lupo that's one of the authors on it. That kind of talks about the different steps, the different types of text that you can use in a text set. Um,
Probably it's not, that name feels familiar because I've looked at like
yeah.
different ways that you can select them. And sometimes I worry in some of those models, they always want to have like a conventional canonical text at the heart of a text set, which is
Mm-hmm.
not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes then that can create a hierarchy of texts um,
Agreed. Yeah,
within
that
it,
was
which
actually that's where I was going with that. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes I see those and I'm like, oh, I like what you're saying here, but also if we're coming back to the hierarchy of text and that like here we've got our anchor and then we can do a comic for some fun reading or
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
the to get these comics to the students that are quote unquote struggling readers and then we're undoing the work of positioning students as experts if we're bringing in text that way.
May I share my screen?
Yeah, please do.
I just found it. Thank you, Google Image. So yeah, it does kind of have that
Hmm.
hierarchical kind of leaning, and
Yeah.
Sarah Lupo's at James Madison. But what if, see, there's that target text that, like, oh, this is the thing. But what if, like, that center, though, was like the topic or the essential question
Hmm.
or the motivating question? And then instead of a hierarchy, all around that, you had like this range of texts that were there to help you get to that question. And this is on ILA. This will mean nothing to listeners that are kind of checking out the audio, but for those of you that are checking out the video, there you go. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I also was thinking about that hierarchy because if you think about it, there's such a complexity in a comic. There's such a complexity in a film
Mhm. Mhm.
that I mean, sometimes I'll have students say to me, "Well, can I just write this?" And I'm going, well, yeah. And it's funny that they use that, intensifier just, can I just write it? As though like that's the simplest form of
Yeah.
communication. Because I think in that moment, the student author recognizes, well, to do this as a comic, I have to think about not only the words, I got to think
Mhm.
about how to represent those words. I've got to think about the condensed space, the representation in visuals, the design features, and same with the film. I mean, I saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3 this weekend, and of course, set through the end credits, and to see the number of people that do things, and I'm not talking about Chris Pratt's chef. By the way, Chris
Yeah.
Pratt does have his own chef. I'm talking about,
Congratulations.
yeah, I know. I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna totally get
Yep.
one. I'm gonna put a student in charge of that next year. Um, no, no,
Job
not at
board.
all. That's right. Um, no, but to think about the number of people whose creative hands are on that
Yeah.
text, and it feels like such even a step to call it a text, but it absolutely is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I kind of think like how I got here. So I'm going to take a step back
Hmm.
as you
Hmm.
were talking about
It's talking about
um
multimodal text sets. We have not used the questions that I had at all, except for one
nope,
thing.
that's okay. Like you know what? I had a thought and I lost it. It'll come back to me, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And interject at any point. I'm thinking that I'm going to make an assumption here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Was your path to comics and media being part of your research agenda? Was that part of your experience in the classroom?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that reminds me of what I was going to say too, because it was just about this amazing classroom teacher. So I'll come back around to her. And
Yeah.
the work, the thinking she's doing around the tech sets and kind of the focus around those.
Hmm.
Um, in my own classroom experience, so I taught fifth grade. And I mean, I did not read comics growing up. I was not a comics reader.
Yeah.
I started dating a comics reader around the time that I started teaching and around the time that I started doing my master's work. And I thought, well, I'm going to be doing a lot of thinking, and I also would like to like cultivate this relationship that I've just started. So like, why don't I like do some comics stuff? And it
Yeah. Yeah.
like the ways in which it shifted my classroom library and who was taking things off the shelf and how often those comics were taken off the shelf. as I was pulling things, like Bone, the first comic I ever read. It was on my shelf, just taped and retaped back together
Oh
because
yeah.
of how popular it was. Um, and so as a teacher, I was just really curious about it, and just noticing how much students loved these texts that weren't even part of my curriculum yet.
Hmm.
Um, and so then I was doing my master's work. That gave me an opportunity to do some experimenting in my own classroom, and it just continued to explode.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
to things I'm doing and seeing today in classrooms. So a teacher researcher, Dr. Extraordinaire Anne Marie Shahan, who I've done
Hmm.
a lot of writing with. She has done a lot of thinking about the canon in her own classroom and in work we've done together, and the ways in which we even noticed ourselves as practitioner researchers in her room thinking about, like, how do we introduce these texts, right? So we
Hmm.
taught
Hmm.
the graphic novel Yummy with
Hmm.
Hamlet,
Hmm.
and even we had to think about how we wanted to reintroduce this unit, as this is not the Hamlet unit anymore, because we
Yeah.
didn't want to position Yummy as supporting Hamlet, which is what we did originally. So like having to like completely shift what's at the center of that diagram when we're doing these text sets, into, okay, what are our big questions? We want to think about revenge. We want to think about power. We want to think about privilege.
Hmm.
So then like shifting the text out of the center, but then building text around those so that we can at least try to disrupt some of that hierarchy, especially something that holds the power of Shakespeare for better and worse. Like
Yeah.
Hamlet's a ton of fun to teach, but it also can shift the dynamics and hierarchies of a classroom depending on who has access to it. So
True. True. True.
yeah.
Yeah, I love Vonnegut's description of Hamlet, when he's doing like the timeline, or not the
Mm-hmm.
timeline, but the shape of a story, because he's like, nothing happens, we're not sure, nothing happens, we're not sure. But that piece that you mentioned was actually the reason why I checked out the book Yummy, because
Oh,
I
it's
hadn't
so
seen it
great.
until then. It really is. It really is. And it's a powerful book, a visceral book. And that's one of the other things I benefit from reading your work, and folks that are sort of in this. I don't know if we're a cluster or a hub or whatever, but people that are interested in doing comics and media and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's
In
always
classrooms.
something more to read. Yeah.
I know. I know. And the thing about Yummy too is I don't know how many times I've had students who just like they finish and they're like, oh, this is the first book I ever read and
Yeah.
finished. And it like something about it grabs students.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I've had that for younger readers, like K2 readers and third grade readers, with Robot Dreams by Sarah Vale.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've had students take that out to classrooms, try it out, and have
Mm-hmm.
students that are very, very reluctant to go, oh, yeah, this is the first book I finished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's powerful.
That move from, oh, I've never read a book, to suddenly I'm a person who has read a book and now I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
read more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting.
You've also, the other thing that I'll mention about your work, and we'll circle back to the teacher that you were going to mention, if you, unless was
That
that
was Anne Marie.
Shahan?
Anne
Oh,
Marie.
okay,
I
okay.
I have
All
many
right.
other teachers that I can mention who are fabulous. But I definitely wanted to. If we're talking about the canon, then we're also talking about Anne Marie. If you're in my life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The other piece that you've done that I really appreciate, I appreciate everything that I've read of yours, including the one that you shared in the edited thing that I got to do.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah, the piece you did on science comics with,
Yeah.
was it
Which
Peralta?
Yeah, which I
Hmm.
wrote with a teacher, and a master student, Lydia Peralta, who I was her advisor, but also just she took a couple classes with me, and she just really got into the comics and tried out some of the science stuff in her classroom. And it students reading those texts, she was able to, she didn't like teach the comic itself. She taught the comic form, and then she had a set of just a variety of the science comics and let students kind of dig into them as mentor texts, and then had them teach science concepts, through using this form as they were learning it. So it
Yeah.
was a lesson on form and then a lesson on science concepts, and the ways in which they could use the form to really show their understanding of the content, but also be really
Mhm.
playful with the content. So, like one student, I think in that article, created a little marble person that was their narrator to talk about space and
Yeah.
matter. And yeah, it was just super cool work that she got to do, and we got to think through together.
Yeah, I was inspired by science comics and by that piece. I was after the skill. This was like March, I think. I was working with
Yeah,
students, and I teach right now. I'm mainly working with sophomores and juniors in high school, which
yeah.
is fun because that's not a group of students. That's not an age group that I've worked with quite as much. Been mostly a middle school person and then university. But I was thinking about going after that process that we go through of close noticing and details and really kind of trying to sell that point home that we have to pay attention to every part of a text. And
Hmm.
science comics was my sort of my lead into talking about that. And I used science comics. I used a lot of different texts through that lesson, but it was science comics volcanoes that I put up as kind of the introduction to say, hey, what do you notice here, and why do you think they're doing that? And we built a good 10 minutes of conversation on one page,
Yeah.
which can really get away from you if you're not careful. But then at the
Oh
same
yeah, I've
time,
done like
it's also
30, 40 minutes on a page with students
oh
before.
yeah,
'Cause,
and
I
it's
mean, they will
okay.
just dig in. It's fun.
Absolutely.
Another science comic that I find so interesting is the dinosaur one.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
because and this is because I love the ways in which comics can play with nonfiction. Is periodically through the book it will stop and say, this is what's true, or these are the facts.
Hmm.
And then they list all these things that are no longer true. And so just this idea of like, we are presenting truth to you, but we all know that it's not really the truth. So this idea that
Yeah.
just the Nathan Hale does this with
Hmm.
um American Revolution comics too, just with the research babies at the end of just like, this is true, but also this is something that you can and should question.
Yeah.
And I think comics by their very nature, like invite us to do that anyway, because they can be such contested texts. And so I love the ways in which, I mean, if we can push students to challenge these factual nonfiction texts, then maybe we can transfer that over into other types of texts that we also want them to challenge and question in media and everything. So yeah, it's a
Absolutely.
playful way of thinking about nonfiction, I think.
You just tapped into where I was going next there too, just
Oh,
to think about the playfulness and
we're vibing.
it totally. Yeah, it's invitational, and if you think about like a history text,
Hmm.
there's a density to that. And even if you're a strong, like really invested history person, there's still that like slog of getting through. But comics and thinking about Nathan Hale, thinking about history comics, there's a fun aspect to it. There's a
Hmm.
playful aspect to it. You can have a narrator talking to you and sort of jumping in and interrupting the story. And even
Yeah.
thinking about the graphic novel or comics adaptation of Howard Zinn's book,
Mm.
there's something completely different that book does in showing you photographs, but then also taking you through sort of the illustrated version as well.
Yeah. And it just this idea of like, this is truth, but this is something we should still question. Like it makes me think of my friend Sarah Kirsten Parrish's work with El Defo too. Just this idea of something being more truthful in the fact that it's not a literal representation memoir. Like,
Mhm.
no, this person is not a rabbit, but in some ways this makes her story more truthful, but also something we can question. And yeah, it's um yeah, and we want students to question those things. Yeah.
Have you seen Save It for Later by
No.
Nate Powell? Um, so Save It for Later is Nate Powell, the one of the people that did March and several
March.
other books.
Hmm.
Um, it's his sort of take on the pandemic period and the political events of the past 5 to 6 years, and all of those sort of things roll together. And there's a scene where he's going to the grocery store and there's nothing on the shelf and people are in masks. And it's one of those
Hmm.
that just hits me because I'm like, yeah, that was one of my first experiences of this. Um, so he chose to represent his children as sort of these mythic animal sort of playful characters. Um, and so when you said that, that just kind of reminded me about that
Yeah.
just a little bit.
Sorry,
Do we have
my
guests?
son. No, I'm okay. No, this is just after school time, and we for
It's cool.
my son just came in like, oh, are you done yet?
Yeah, we're actually about to wrap up here in just the
Yep.
next few
Sorry, I
minutes.
guess he was my warning. He's back outside now, but he
No,
just came to
it
check in,
works.
see how things were going.
Family is always welcome. I've
I know.
had
I gave
several
him a little
people.
squeeze down here.
Oh yeah, it all works. It all works. I've
Yep.
had several authors have pets that sort of jump into the Zoom. But just thinking about when you see something even that's literal
Did you
or
just compare
realistic.
my kid to a pet? Actually,
No,
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 that's
no.
fair. That's fair. Actually, I just like it took me a minute to be like, no, no, no. Like dogs show up in family pictures too.
This is true. We don't have children. We have schnauzers. So it's for me, it's a term of affection. But yeah, yeah.
It's not for everyone. I was like, wait a minute.
Zoom is an open channel. It is an
It
open
is
channel.
absolutely.
Anybody can hop on.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah, the really interesting things with the literal and the figurative that can happen
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
comics and film. And Miyazaki, I think, is the person that a lot of people talk about, who I did not know that much about before I started talking with comics people. And then it's like, oh, okay, there, there's all of this other story and all of these places that I haven't gone in my reading that I continue
Yeah.
to
Oh my
try to
gosh.
go.
It's whenever I start to like go down another hole, it's just like, oh, there's so much more out there. And
Mhm.
so much like good, important work. I just was looking at an article, just like thinking about like the science comics that it's a group of folks, Matuk and Hurwitz, Spiegel, and Diamond, thinking about teachers using comics in a science class, but they talk about the ways in which it makes the work more equitable in diverse
Oh yeah.
spaces. And I think like that's really important to think about too when we're thinking about the work people are doing out there and nonfiction comics, like making things more accessible content wise, but also just making spaces more equitable too. It's important work.
Yeah, yeah, and um, I mean, equity is it's such an important kind of trajectory. And thinking again about that model I put up, like maybe that's one of those things that's at the center of, hey, this is not necessarily about getting to this particular text, but making sure
Yeah.
that all of this is equitable. Everyone can be critical. Everyone has a voice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I think, yeah, those multimodal tech sets then create those avenues for those, for just more folks to to get access to think, to challenge, to see themselves in these
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
texts. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Well, that's true too. I mean, it's part of healing. It's part of seeing yourself and
Hmm.
growing as a reader, but also as a person.
Yeah.
So so yeah, there's just we've not really stuck with the questions, but I think we've still gotten
No, that's okay.
to the point that there's just so much work that can be done.
Yeah.
And it's important not to count out any text. It's important not to discredit any text or any student for that matter, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes that still happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're discrediting texts, like not thinking about the fact that that's discrediting students too, who love those texts. Yeah.
So as we're coming down to our last couple of minutes together to wrap our third podcast,
Yes.
pretty soon we're gonna have like a five timer jacket, like on SNL. That's my
I
second
know, right?
SNL
Like, do we get
reference.
like a ring
I
or
think so.
patches?
I think so. Definitely, we need to invest in something. Any final words about your work, teachers that you want to thank? Any, educators are sort of one of the major audiences of the show. So, any message that you'd like to just kind of cap off with as it relates to your work or appreciation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've already said Danny's name on here because
Hmm.
gosh, I love working and writing with her
Yeah,
through the
same.
podcast, but also like thinking about disciplinary literacies. Like she and Sarah and I wrote a piece together about that. So like she really like helps my thinking through those things. But like I I also just have to say the names Amanda Manning. Along, she's another Albuquerque teacher I work with. She's just amazing and just challenging the system and just disrupting what counts in classrooms, making sure students see books that make that they are in that matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so um, am so welcomed into her classroom and to Anne Marie's classroom all of the time. And I'm just grateful to share that space with them. Um, yeah, I'm just, there's such amazing teachers here. So I'm just very lucky I get to learn from them and with them. So yeah.
And I've been on a journey back into the K-12 world, but amazing educators out there that I've
Yeah.
worked with as well and
Yeah.
continue to work with. And it's a very special, very difficult, but also very important profession. So
It
thank
is.
you
Well, and
for
I
your
think
work.
about that article that you wrote talking to teachers about including classroom comics in their classrooms and
Hmm. Hmm.
just like the hard but important work that they're doing. It just it it's hard and important work, and it, students know when it's meaningful to them too, which I think is something that you captured there. It just, yeah, it's teachers are amazing people, and I'm just glad to be among them.
Same, same here. And you mentioned earlier, in the show when you were in the classroom. One of the
Yeah,
things that my undergraduates pressed me on was, "Oh, you're still in the classroom." Even when I was at the university, that's the classroom space, and so it's definitely that connected thing. So celebration to you as well for the
yeah.
work that you're doing and working with students and encouraging them and going to classrooms of theirs and supporting what they do.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for saying that. It's a place I love to be. So
Well, I will end there because I know you have a young person who
I do have a little 2-year-old who's ready for his mama to come back in.
yeah, yeah, love it, love it. He could have come on, that would have been
I
fun.
know, I know. I had a moment like I could lift him up, but then that's going to be where the podcast goes next. And
Right,
a
right, right.
podcast dedicated to him would be amazing, but not in the in the outline we had for today.
We'll do that for the 4th episode
That
together. That
sounds
that
good.
sounds
I'm
good.
in for that. I'll work on the patch.
Alright, alright. We'll let Danny know as well.
Yes, please. Well, thank you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for doing this work and collecting all of these voices into a space and doing
my
doing the
pleasure.
work in the classroom. It's just a pleasure to get to chat with you and share space with you.
Always good to talk with you too. I always look forward to it, and, may the conversation, as one of my friends says, "May the conversation continue."
Yes, I love that. Thank you.
You